Millionaire sees twins being left at a shelter and begging for help. The truth rain hammered against the windshield of Jackson Reed's Bentley as his driver carefully steered through the stormy streets of downtown. At 52, Jackson had turned Reed Enterprises into a billion-dollar empire, rising from a small-town boy with big dreams to one of the most powerful men in New York. "Sir, there seems to be an issue with the engine," Harrison, his driver of 15 years, said with an apologetic tone as the luxury vehicle sputtered and finally came to a stop. Harrison, his driver of 15 years, apologized as the luxury vehicle sputtered and jerked, eventually coming to a stop. Jackson glanced up from his tablet, where he had been focused on quarterly reports. "Where are we?" he asked. "Bridgeport District, sir, near the community center," Harrison replied. Jackson sighed, checking his Felipe watch. The board meeting wasn't for another 2 hours, but he hated being late almost as much as he despised inefficiency. "Call the service team," he instructed, returning to his reports while the rain drummed rhythmically on the car roof. 10 minutes passed before Harrison cleared his throat. "The service team is delayed, sir. At least an hour in this weather." Jackson's jaw tightened slightly, the only visible sign of his frustration. "Fine. I'll wait inside that building while you handle this." He nodded toward a weathered brick structure across the street with a faded sign reading Bridgeport Community Center. Umbrella in hand, Jackson stepped out of the car, his Italian leather shoes immediately soaked by a puddle. The discomfort deepened his scowl as he approached the building's entrance. Before he could reach the door, it burst open. A man in his 30s stormed out, dragging 2 small boys by their wrists. Both children, no older than 4 or 5, had identical faces, dark hair, and tear-streaked cheeks. "I can't do this anymore," the man shouted, his voice carrying even through the downpour. "Your mother's gone, and you're not my responsibility. Please don't leave us," one of the boys sobbed, his small voice breaking Jackson's concentration. "Never signed up to raise my girlfriend's kids after she died," the man continued, roughly releasing their wrists. "The center can find you somewhere to go." Jackson stood frozen, witnessing the scene unfold. Something about the boys' desperate faces stirred something dormant inside him. "Sir," a woman's voice called from the doorway, "you can't just abandon these children." But the man was already walking away, shoulders hunched against the rain, deaf to the pleas behind him. Without thinking, Jackson found himself moving forward, stepping between the retreating figure and the weeping boys. "Excuse me," he called, his authoritative voice halting the man mid-stride. "You can't leave children alone in a storm." The man turned, anger flashing across his face before recognition dawned. Everyone in New York knew Jackson Reed's face from magazine covers and news segments. "Mr. Reed," the man stammered, "these aren't my kids. Their mother died last month on their birthday. I tried, but I can't do it anymore." Jackson looked down at the twins. Their identical brown eyes were wide with fear and confusion. Something about them seemed hauntingly familiar. "What are your names?" he asked, kneeling despite the rain soaking his custom suit. "I'm Tyler," one whispered. "I'm Ethan," said the other. In that moment, as rain streamed down his face and soaked through his expensive clothes, Jackson Reed, who had built an empire but lived alone in an empty mansion, felt something crack in the carefully constructed walls around his heart. "Reed, is everything all right?" Harrison called, hurrying across the street with a spare umbrella. Jackson stood motionless, rain still streaming down his face as he stared at the twin boys. The social worker from the community center had ushered them back inside, away from their fleeing guardian and the downpour. "Cancel my meetings today," Jackson said, a decision forming that surprised even him. Inside the community center, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating worn furniture and faded inspirational posters. The twins sat huddled together on a tattered couch, their small shoulders touching as if drawing strength from each other. "Mr. Reed, I'm Sarah Collins," the social worker introduced herself, extending her hand poorly, concealing her surprise at finding a billionaire in her modest facility. "I appreciate your concern, but we have protocols for situations like this." "What happens to them now?" Jackson asked, his eyes never leaving the boys. "Foster care, hopefully together, though placing twins can be challenging," Sarah sighed. Their mother died in a tragic car accident on their 4th birthday last month. The boyfriend tried, and their father is unknown. According to their file, their mother, Eliza Taylor, never listed him. Jackson stepped closer to the boys, something compelling him forward despite his usual discomfort around children. "Tyler and Ethan, right?" Jackson asked gently. The boys nodded, their identical faces solemn. "Are you going to take us away too?" Tyler asked, his voice barely audible. The question pierced Jackson unexpectedly. Throughout his career, he'd made multi-million-dollar decisions in seconds, but none had felt as momentous as the one forming now. "Mr. Reed," Sarah interrupted, "while we appreciate your concern, these matters involve significant legal complexities." "I'm familiar with legal complexities," Jackson replied, pulling out his phone. "Thomas, I need emergency temporary guardianship. Paperwork drawn up immediately." "Yes, for 2 children." Sarah's eyes widened. "Mr. Reed, you can't just—" "I can provide these boys with safety, stability, and comfort while more permanent arrangements are made," Jackson stated with the same confidence that had built his empire, "unless you have a better immediate solution." 2 hours later, after a flurry of calls, paperwork, and the arrival of Jackson's legal team, he stood in the community center's small office, signing the temporary guardianship documents. "This is highly unusual," Sarah remarked, watching the proceedings with a mixture of concern and hope. "I'm aware," Jackson replied, his signature flowing across the final page. As they prepared to leave, Ethan gently tugged at Jackson's sleeve. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked. Jackson knelt to their level. "To my home. It's big and probably a bit boring for boys your age, but we'll fix that." "Can we stay together?" Tyler asked, clutching his brother's hand. "Yes," Jackson promised, something in their faces still tugging at a memory he couldn't quite place. Always together. Outside, the rain had stopped, and Harrison waited with the newly repaired Bentley. The twins hesitated before approaching the luxury vehicle, their small backpacks tightly holding their only belongings. "It's okay," Jackson reassured them, opening the door himself rather than waiting for Harrison. As the car pulled away from the curb, Jackson's phone buzzed with a message from his sister, Victoria. The board members were furious about the cancelled meeting. "What emergency?" the message read. Jackson glanced at the twins, now pressed against the window, watching the city pass by, and typed simply, "I'll explain later." In 24 hours, his carefully structured world had shifted, and for reasons he couldn't yet explain, it felt right. The Reed mansion loomed against the evening sky, its imposing stone and glass facade a testament to Jackson's success. As the Bentley passed through the wrought iron gates, the twins' eyes widened at the sprawling estate. "You live here?" Tyler whispered, pressing his small face against the window. "It's like a castle," Ethan added, equally awestruck. Jackson watched their reactions with unexpected pleasure. "It's just a house, too big for one person, really." Inside the mansion, the soaring entryway echoed with their footsteps. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper who had maintained the pristine emptiness of the Reed home for 15 years, appeared immediately, barely concealing her shock at the sight of 2 small children following Jackson. "Sir?" she questioned, her eyes darting between Jackson and the twins. "Mrs. Winters, these are Tyler and Ethan. They'll be staying with us for a while. We'll need rooms prepared, preferably adjoining ones," Jackson instructed. Before Mrs. Winters could respond, the mansion's front door burst open. Victoria Reed, Jackson's younger sister and chief operations officer of Reed Enterprises, strode in, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble floors. "Jackson, what the hell is going on? You cancelled the Asian market expansion meeting for an emergency that you couldn't even explain." Her eyes landed on the twins, narrowing immediately. "And who are these children?" Jackson guided the boys toward Mrs. Winters. "Perhaps you could show them the kitchen. I imagine they're hungry." Once the children were out of earshot, Victoria pounced. "Have you lost your mind? You can't just bring random children home like stray puppies. They were abandoned, Victoria, right in front of me. So call social services. That's what they're for. You're a businessman, not a foster parent." Jackson moved to his study, knowing his sister would follow. The wood-paneled room with its leather furnishings and walls of achievements felt different somehow, as if the presence of the twins elsewhere in the house had already changed the mansion's atmosphere. "I filed," "For temporary guardianship," he said, pouring himself a scotch. "Just until proper arrangements can be made." Victoria's perfectly manicured hand slammed down on his desk. "This is completely irrational behavior. The board is already questioning your judgment after the Richardson deal fell through. This will confirm their concerns." Jackson took a contemplative sip of his drink. "There's something else, something about these boys." "What?" Victoria demanded. "They remind me of Nathan." The name hung in the air between them, rarely spoken in the 5 years since their younger brother's death in a climbing accident. Victoria's expression hardened. "That's ridiculous. You're projecting because you feel guilty about Nathan." "Look at their faces, Victoria. They're about the right age. Nathan was seeing someone before he died, someone he kept from the family." "Stop it," Victoria snapped. "Nathan would have told us if he had children. He wouldn't have abandoned them." "Maybe he didn't know," Jackson said quietly. "The boy's mother died on their 4th birthday last month. I'm going to look into it." Victoria stared at her brother, calculation replacing anger in her eyes. "Do you understand what you're implying? If these were Nathan's sons, they would be heirs to the Reed fortune." "Their fortune, our fortune," Jackson corrected. "And yes, I'm aware of the implications. I won't let you throw away everything we've built on some emotional whim." As Victoria stormed out, Jackson stood at his study window, watching the darkness settle over the estate grounds. For the first time in years, the emptiness of his success felt palpable, and the sudden presence of 2 small boys seemed to illuminate what had been missing. "Sir," Mrs. Winters appeared at the door. "The children are asking for you." With unexpected certainty, Jackson set down his glass. "I'm coming." The sun filtered through unfamiliar curtains, waking Tyler with a start. For a moment, confusion clouded his small face, until he spotted his brother sleeping beside him. The events of yesterday came rushing back: the rain, the man who left them, and the tall stranger in the expensive suit who had brought them to this enormous house. Across the hall, Jackson was already awake, reviewing emails on his tablet, when a small knock interrupted his concentration. He opened the bedroom door to find Tyler standing alone, his hair tousled from sleep, clutching a worn stuffed dinosaur. "Good morning," Jackson said, surprised to find himself unsure how to address a 4-year-old. "Is there breakfast?" Tyler asked quietly. "Ethan's still sleeping." Jackson checked his watch, 6:30 a.m., 2 hours before his usual breakfast meeting with his executive team. "Yes, of course. Let's see what Mrs. Winters can prepare." The kitchen, a showpiece of stainless steel and marble that had hosted professional chefs for business dinners, rarely saw Jackson himself. But today he suddenly felt strangely intimate with just the 2 of them. Mrs. Winters, typically punctual at 7 a.m., hadn't arrived yet. "I can make cereal," Tyler offered, seeing Jackson's hesitation. "I'm sure I can manage breakfast," Jackson replied, though uncertainty flickered across his face as he surveyed the kitchen he rarely used. After some searching and one minor spill, Jackson produced bowls of cereal for Tyler and himself. They sat at the massive kitchen island, the small boy and the powerful businessman in surprisingly comfortable silence. "Thank you for letting us stay in your castle," Tyler said between spoonfuls. "It's not a castle," Jackson corrected automatically, then softened. "But you're welcome." Mrs. Winters arrived to find them thus engaged, her surprise evident. "Sir, I would have prepared breakfast if I'd known." "We managed," Jackson interrupted, a hint of pride in his voice that surprised him. As the day progressed, the Reed mansion's usual order gave way to a new reality. Jackson conducted conference calls from his home office, while Mrs. Winters supervised the boys, occasionally interrupted by small faces appearing at his door with questions or discoveries. By afternoon, Jackson had rescheduled meetings, arranged for childhood essentials to be delivered, and fielded 3 angry calls from Victoria, who remained convinced her brother had lost his mind. "They need clothes, toys, books," Jackson instructed, his assistant over the phone. "Whatever normal 4-year-olds require. Normal 4-year-olds, sir." His assistant repeated, bewilderment evident in her voice. That evening, as Jackson reviewed the day's business developments, he heard a crash from upstairs, followed by crying. He found Ethan on the floor of their bedroom, a shattered vase beside him. "I'm sorry," the boy sobbed. "Please don't send us away." Jackson knelt beside him, checking for injuries. It's just a vase, Ethan. But it looks expensive, Tyler said, hovering protectively near his brother. It is, Jackson acknowledged. But things can be replaced. People can't. The words hung in the air, surprising Jackson himself. As a businessman, he'd replaced people regularly. Executives who underperformed, assistants who couldn't keep up. Yet, looking at these two vulnerable boys, he felt a shift in his priorities that both confused and compelled him. That night, after Mrs. Winters had helped the twins prepare for bed in their new dinosaur pajamas, rushed by courier from the city's most exclusive children's boutique, Jackson found himself reading a bedtime story for the first time in his life. "Now, will you be here tomorrow?" Ethan asked sleepily as Jackson closed the book. The question, simple yet profound, caught Jackson off guard. In his world of meetings and acquisitions, tomorrow was always planned, always certain. "Yes," he promised, "I'll be here tomorrow." The Metropolitan Club's grand ballroom glittered with New York's financial elite. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements, a fitting backdrop for the annual Business Leadership Gala. Jackson adjusted his bow tie as the Bentley approached the venue. In the rear seat, Tyler and Ethan sat uncomfortably in custom-tailored suits, their identical faces serious. "Remember what we discussed?" Jackson said gently. "Just for a short while, then Mrs. Winters will take you home." "Why can't we stay with you?" Tyler asked, straightening his miniature bow tie with determination. "These events are boring for children," Jackson explained, though the truth was more complicated. He had received the Distinguished Leadership Award for 3 consecutive years, and tonight's appearance was expected, despite his recent absence from the office. "We'll be good," Ethan promised, his eyes earnest. Harrison opened the car door and flashbulbs immediately illuminated the night. The unexpected sight of Jackson Reed with 2 identical young boys created an immediate stir among the waiting photographers. Inside, conversations paused as Jackson entered, a twin on each side. Victoria, already present and deep in conversation with board members, froze mid-sentence. "Jackson!" Gregory Whitfield, chairman of Meridian Investments, approached immediately. "I didn't realize you were bringing guests." "Tyler and Ethan," Jackson introduced, resting a hand on each boy's shoulder. "They're staying with me temporarily." News of Jackson's unexpected guardianship spread through the ballroom like wildfire. Behind crystal flutes of champagne, whispers and speculations multiplied. "A publicity stunt?" Jackson overheard someone murmur. "Corporate image rehabilitation after the Richardson fiasco," another voice suggested. "Reed's having a midlife crisis," someone else added. "First, the cancelled meetings." "Now playing daddy." Victoria appeared at his elbow, her smile tight. "A word, brother?" In a quiet corner, she hissed, "What were you thinking bringing them here? You've turned yourself into a spectacle." "They're children, not accessories," Jackson replied evenly, "and I wasn't about to leave them alone their first week in a strange place." "This isn't like you," Victoria insisted. "The Jackson Reed I know wouldn't disrupt his entire life for 2 random children." Before he could respond, Maxwell Pierce, his chief competitor and longtime rival, approached with exaggerated warmth. "Reed, heard you've become a family man. Overnight. Tell me, is this a new corporate social responsibility initiative? Adopt a child, improve your public image." Something cold and hard settled in Jackson's chest. "Actually, Pierce, it's called basic human decency. You should try it sometime." Pierce's smile faltered. "Just curious, what inspired this sudden paternal instinct, Mr. Reed?" Ethan's small voice interrupted as he tugged at Jackson's sleeve. "Tyler doesn't feel good." Indeed, the other twin stood nearby, his face pale. Jackson immediately knelt, toe eye level. "What's wrong, Tyler?" "My stomach hurts," the boy whispered. "And everyone staring at us." Jackson straightened. Decision made. "Excuse me, gentlemen. Family emergency." Pierce's mocking voice followed him. "Family emergency? That's a new one, Reed." Outside, as Harrison brought the car around, Victoria caught up to them. "Jackson, you can't leave now. The award presentation is in 30 minutes. Jackson helped the twins into the Bentley. "Send my regrets." "This isn't you," Victoria insisted. "These boys are changing you, and not for the better." Jackson paused before entering the car. "Maybe who I was needed changing." As the Bentley pulled away, Ethan looked up at Jackson. "Are you in trouble because of us?" Jackson considered the question seriously. His carefully constructed reputation, his business relationships, his sister's disapproval, all weighed against the well-being of these two boys who had unexpectedly entered his life. "No," he answered with surprising certainty. "Some things are more important than business dinners." Tyler's small hand found his. "Thank you for taking us home." Something shifted in Jackson's chest, something that felt remarkably like purpose. The autumn sun cast golden light through the tall windows of the Reed Mansion study, where Jackson sat reviewing quarterly reports. 3 weeks had passed since the twins' arrival, and subtle changes had transformed the once austere home. Colorful drawings adorned the refrigerator door, small shoes cluttered the entryway, and toys occasionally appeared in unexpected places. A soft knock interrupted Jackson's concentration. Tyler stood in the doorway, homework folder in hand. "Mr. Jackson, can you help me with my numbers?" he asked hesitantly. 2 days earlier, Jackson had enrolled the twins in Westridge Academy, an exclusive private school that had accommodated the unusual situation with surprising flexibility. "After a generous donation, of course," Jackson replied, setting aside projections for Asian market expansion. As they worked through simple addition problems, Jackson found himself impressed by Tyler's methodical approach. Ethan, meanwhile, had spread art supplies across the kitchen table, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration as he drew elaborate dinosaur scenes. "They're settling in remarkably well," commented Mrs. Winters later that evening as she prepared dinner. The housekeeper, initially bewildered by the children's presence, had developed a soft spot for the twins. "Yes," Jackson agreed, watching the boys play a makeshift game of hide-and-seek through the mansion's many rooms. "They're resilient." The phone rang. Victoria, for the 3rd time that day. Jackson let it go to voicemail. That night, as Jackson tucked the twins into bed, a ritual that had quickly become non-negotiable, Ethan asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "Are we staying here forever?" Jackson paused, aware of both boys watching him intently. The temporary guardianship papers sat in his desk drawer, but his legal team had already begun exploring more permanent options. "Would you like to stay?" he asked carefully. The twins exchanged identical looks, that silent communication Jackson had noticed between them. "Yes," Tyler answered for both, "but our other daddy said he wanted us too, and then he didn't." Something protective surged in Jackson's chest. "I'm not going to change my mind about you." The next morning brought Tyler's first school presentation. Jackson rescheduled a critical investor meeting, much to Victoria's fury, to attend. Sitting among other parents, most significantly older than their children, Jackson felt oddly out of place yet strangely right. Tyler spotted him from the small stage and beamed. "That smile?" Jackson froze momentarily. It was Nathan's smile. The same slight dimple on the left cheek, the same crinkle around the eyes. After the presentation, Tyler rushed toward him, certificate in hand. "Did you see me?" "I didn't forget any of my lines." "You were excellent," Jackson assured him, that nagging sense of familiarity intensifying. That afternoon, while the twins were at their first playdate, Jackson found himself in his rarely used home gym, rummaging through old photo albums stored in a cabinet. There it was, Nathan at 5, grinning at the camera after winning a swimming competition. The resemblance to the twins was undeniable. His phone buzzed, Mrs. Winters informing him that Ethan had fallen on the playground and seemed upset. Without hesitation, Jackson abandoned his investigation and drove to retrieve him from the other family's home. He found Ethan with a scraped knee, trying valiantly not to cry. "It's okay to cry when you're hurt," Jackson said softly, cleaning the wound with supplies from the first aid kit he'd begun carrying in his briefcase. "Big boys don't cry," Ethan whispered. "That's what our other daddy said." Jackson met his eyes firmly. "Different families have different rules. In ours, it's okay to show how you feel." On the drive home, both boys unusually quiet in the back seat, Jackson made a decision. He would find out if these boys were Nathan's sons. Not because it would change how he felt about them, but because they deserved to know their history. And if Victoria continued to stand in his way, she would discover that his protective instincts extended far beyond the boardroom. A single envelope rested on the silver tray where Mrs. Winters placed the morning mail. Unlike the premium stationery of business correspondence, this was plain white, hand-addressed in blue ink with no return address. Jackson examined it with curiosity as he sipped his morning coffee. The twins were upstairs getting ready for school, their morning routine now running with surprising smoothness. After 6 weeks in the Reed mansion, he slid his letter opener beneath the flap and extracted a yellowed newspaper clipping. It showed a younger Nathan Reed receiving an Environmental Conservation Award 5 years ago, shortly before his death. Beneath the clipping, handwritten in the same blue ink. "They have his eyes, don't they?" Jackson's coffee mug froze midway to his lips. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the message cryptic yet confirming that someone else had noticed the resemblance between the twins and Nathan. "Ready for school?" Tyler announced, bounding into the kitchen with Ethan close behind, both dressed in Westridge Academy uniforms. Jackson quickly tucked the clipping into his pocket. "Breakfast first," he reminded them. The mysterious message momentarily set aside as he helped pour cereal and cut fruit, tasks that had become second nature in recent weeks. Later, after dropping the boys at school, Jackson sat in his parked Bentley examining the clipping again. Who had sent it? Who else believed the twins might be Nathan's children? His phone rang. Victoria again. With a sigh, he answered. "The board needs answers, Jackson," she began without preamble. "I've missed 3 meetings this month. Roberts is suggesting a vote of confidence." "Handle it, Victoria. That's why you're COO." "This isn't like you," she pressed. "Those children have completely disrupted your focus. Or perhaps," Jackson countered after a pause, "they've clarified it. I received something interesting this morning, a clipping of Nathan with a note suggesting the twins look like him." Victoria's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Someone's trying to manipulate you. They know you're vulnerable because of Nathan, or someone knows the truth." "There is no truth to find, Jackson," he replied firmly. "Nathan would have told us if he had children." After ending the call, Jackson drove to Reed Enterprises headquarters, the newspaper clipping securely in his pocket. In his office, he instructed his assistant to cancel his afternoon meetings and called in Jenkins, the head of corporate security. "I need a discreet investigation," Jackson explained, showing him the clipping. "Find out everything you can about Eliza Taylor, the twins' mother, and analyze this note. I want to know who sent it." Jenkins nodded, his expression professionally neutral despite the unusual request. That evening, as Jackson helped the twins with their bedtime routine, bath time, teeth brushing, story reading, his phone buzzed with a message from Jenkins. "Preliminary findings on your desk tomorrow 8 a.m. Later, unable to sleep, Jackson found himself in his home office, searching through digital archives of his brother's life. Nathan had been the free spirit of the Reed family, passionate about environmental causes, uninterested in the family business. His death during a climbing expedition had left a void that Jackson had filled with more work, more acquisitions, more empty success. A soft noise at the doorway made him look up. Ethan stood there in dinosaur pajamas, clutching a stuffed T-Rex. "Bad dream?" Jackson asked gently. Ethan nodded, padding across the room to climb into Jackson's lap, a gesture of trust that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. "Want to talk about it?" Jackson asked, breathing in the clean scent of children's shampoo from Ethan's hair. "I dreamed about Mommy," Ethan whispered. "I can't remember her face anymore." Jackson's heart constricted. "Would it help to see a picture?" Ethan nodded against his chest. "Tomorrow," Jackson promised. "We'll find a picture of your mother." As Ethan drifted back to sleep in his arms, Jackson found himself wondering if Nathan had known about these boys, his apparent sons, and if the path that had led them to his doorstep was coincidence or something more profound. Across town, Victoria Reed sat in her penthouse apartment, phone in hand, speaking in hushed tones. "He's getting closer. We need to move quickly." The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows of the Reed mansion, capturing a scene that would have been unimaginable 2 months ago. Jackson, dressed casually in weekend attire rather than his customary suit, flipped pancakes while the twins sat at the counter eagerly awaiting breakfast. "Dinosaur shape," Ethan requested, his legs swinging beneath the high stool. "Star-shaped for me," Tyler added, carefully arranging napkins and forks with surprising precision for a 4-year-old. Jackson, who once couldn't boil water without assistance, had mastered the art of shaped pancakes through determined weekend practice. Mrs. Winters watched from the doorway, a smile playing at her lips as she witnessed her employer, once the most unapproachable man in New York, carefully pour batter into dinosaur and star molds, Jenkins called. She informed him quietly, "He'll be arriving at 11 with those documents you requested." Jackson nodded, his expression momentarily serious before Tyler's laughter reclaimed his attention. The past 2 months had established unexpected routines in the Reed household. Weekday mornings meant school drop-offs before work, evenings were for homework and stories, and weekends had become sacred family time, a concept Jackson had previously considered an inefficient use of productive hours. Today's plans include the Central Park Zoo, a promise made weeks ago that Jackson had rearranged board meetings to keep. "Look, Mr. Jackson," Tyler exclaimed proudly, displaying his empty plate. "I ate all my protein just like you said. Helps your brain grow." "Excellent work," Jackson praised, still awkward with compliments but improving daily. The Mr. before his name remained, despite his gentle suggestions otherwise. Some transitions couldn't be rushed. At 11 precisely, Jenkins arrived with a leather portfolio. The twins had been enticed outside by Mrs. Winters to help plant fall flowers, giving Jackson privacy for what might be a sensitive conversation. "What did you find?" Jackson asked, accepting the folder. Jenkins, normally unflappable, seemed uncomfortable. "It's complicated, sir." Eliza Taylor worked as an environmental researcher at the Northwood Conservation Group 5 years ago, where Nathan was a board member. Jackson supplied the connection, solidifying it. "Yes, they appear to have been involved for approximately 8 months. She left suddenly around the time the twins would have been conceived." Jackson examined the few photographs Jenkins had uncovered. Nathan and Eliza at a fundraiser, standing close. Another showing them hiking, Nathan's arm around her shoulders. "There's more," Jenkins continued. "Someone accessed Eliza Taylor's records at the community center the day after you took guardianship of the twins. The records clerk remembers. A well-dressed woman claiming to be from Family Services." "Victoria," Jackson murmured. "I can't confirm that, sir, but there's something else." Jenkins hesitated. "The DNA testing facility you asked about, I've secured an appointment for the twins next Wednesday. Complete discretion guaranteed." Jackson nodded, his gaze drawn to the window where Tyler and Ethan knelt in the garden, carefully patting soil around chrysanthemums under Mrs. Winters' guidance. "Thank you, Jenkins. One more thing," the anonymous note. "Still working on it. Sir, the paper is common, available at any office supply store. The postmark is Manhattan." After Jenkins departed, Jackson joined the twins in the garden, kneeling beside them despite his expensive casual wear. "We're making the flowers a new home," Ethan explained seriously. "Everyone needs a good home," Jackson replied, helping Tyler steady a wavering plant. Tyler looked up at him, soil smudged across one cheek. "Is this our home now? For real?" The question held a weight beyond the simple words. In the 8 weeks since the rainstorm that had brought these boys into his life, Jackson had changed in ways he was only beginning to understand. His sister accused him of neglecting the business. His board questioned his commitment. But for the first time, Jackson felt he might be building something more valuable than an empire. "Yes," he answered, certainty filling his voice. "This is your home, for as long as you want it to be. Can I skip school today?" Tyler asked, pushing his cereal around the bowl without eating. His usually bright expression had dimmed, something Jackson had begun to recognize as a signal of deeper concerns. "What's wrong?" Jackson inquired, setting aside his tablet where he'd been reviewing the day's schedule. After 3 months with the twins, business priorities had shifted in ways that still surprised his executive team. Tyler hesitated, glancing at Ethan, who nodded encouragement. "We have to make a family tree for school. Everyone needs to bring pictures of their mom and dad and grandparents," Tyler explained. Jackson sat down, his coffee mug understanding the dilemma immediately. "I see," he replied. "We don't know who our dad is," Ethan added quietly. "And we only have one picture of Mom." The single photograph of Eliza Taylor, recovered from community center records, now sat framed in each boy's bedroom. It showed a young woman with kind eyes and dark hair, smiling at the camera but revealing little about who she'd been. "Would you like to know more about your family?" Jackson asked, carefully aware they were approaching territory he'd been researching. Privately, the twins exchanged their characteristic glance, that silent communication Jackson had grown to respect. "Are you our family now?" they asked in unison. Tyler asked directly. The question caught Jackson unprepared, despite months of growing attachment. Before he could formulate a response, Mrs. Winters entered with a reminder about a scheduled call. "With Tokyo investors. We'll continue this conversation after school," Jackson promised, watching uncertainty flicker across the twins' identical faces. At Reed Enterprises, Jackson found Victoria waiting in his office, elegantly dressed and cold-eyed. "The DNA testing facility called to confirm tomorrow's appointment," she said without preamble. "You're really going through with this?" "The boys deserve to know their history," Jackson replied, organizing documents on his desk with deliberate calm. "And if they're Nathan's, what then?" Victoria's voice carried an edge of something beyond her usual pragmatism. "Then they're our family in more ways than one," Jackson stated, his tone steady. Victoria's laugh held no humor. "You've always been sentimental about Nathan. It clouded your business judgment when he was alive, and now it's happening again." "This isn't about business," Jackson said firmly. "Everything is about business for a Reed," Victoria countered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against his desk. "What would Father say if he could see you now?" Their father, Harrison Reed, had built the original Reed Company from nothing, through ruthless determination and sacrifice of personal relationships. "He'd probably be disappointed," Jackson acknowledged. "But I'm beginning to think that might be a compliment." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "I've scheduled an emergency board meeting for Friday. Your recent distractions have become a concern." After she left, Jackson sat motionless, weighing competing responsibilities. The empire he'd spent decades building now seemed secondary to the questions in two small boys' eyes. His assistant interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Reed," Mrs. Winters called, "Ethan's teacher would like to speak with you immediately." At Westridge Academy, Jackson found Ethan in the school counselor's office, tear tracks visible on his flushed face. "There was an incident during the family heritage discussion," the counselor explained gently. "Another student made some unkind comments about Ethan's family situation." Jackson knelt before Ethan's chair. "What happened?" "We're not a real family," Ethan whispered. "He said you're not our real dad and probably don't even want us." Something fierce and protective surged through Jackson. "Ethan, look at me," he said softly. "Families come in many different forms. Some are connected by blood, others by choice. Ours may have started unexpectedly, but that doesn't make it any less real." Ethan studied him skeptically. "But you're not our dad." Jackson considered his next words carefully, aware they might change everything. "Not by birth, but in all the ways that matter most. Caring for you, protecting you, wanting the best for you. I would very much like to be like your dad if you'll let me." "Like adoption?" Ethan asked, his voice small but hopeful. "Yes," Jackson confirmed, the decision crystallizing even as he spoke. "If that's something you and Tyler would want." On the drive home, Ethan unusually quiet beside him, Jackson realized the DNA results wouldn't change his course now, only perhaps the legal path they would take to become a family. The DNA testing facility occupied the 15th floor of a sleek medical building in Midtown. Jackson sat in the pristine waiting room while the twins underwent simple cheek swabs in a nearby examination room. The procedure had been explained to them as a special kind of test to learn more about their family history, a partial truth that Jackson hoped would soon become complete. "Mr. Reed," the technician appeared, clipboard in hand. "We've collected the samples. Results typically take 5 to 7 business days, but given the priority status, we should have them by Monday." Jackson nodded, his own DNA sample already on file from the previous day. "Complete confidentiality is essential," he reminded her. "Of course, our security protocols exceed industry standards." As they left the building, Tyler tugged at Jackson's sleeve. "Does this test tell us who our dad is?" Jackson helped both boys into the waiting car before answering. "It might help us understand more about your family connections, like if we're related to you," Ethan asked with the startling directness children often possess. "Like if we're related to you?" Jackson met his gaze. "Yes, exactly like that." That afternoon, while the twins attended their first swimming lesson, an activity Jackson had arranged after discovering their natural affinity for water, another echo of Nathan, he met with Jenkins in his home office. "I've compiled everything. Available on Eliza Taylor," Jenkins reported, placing a substantial file on the desk. Born in Cincinnati, moved to New York 8 years ago to pursue environmental science. Worked at Northwood Conservation during the same period Nathan served on their board, Jackson supplied, solidifying the connection. "Yes, they appear to have been involved for approximately 8 months. She left suddenly around the time the twins would have been conceived." Jackson examined a photograph showing Eliza and Nathan at a fundraising gala. They stood close together, Nathan's arm resting, comfortably at her waist, both smiling. "They were clearly involved," Jackson observed, "yet Nathan never mentioned her to me." "There's more," Jenkins continued. "After leaving Northwood, Eliza worked briefly at a research station in Montana. She returned to New York 4 years ago, shortly before the twins' birth. Hospital records confirm she died from complications during delivery." Jackson's chest tightened at the thought of Eliza facing pregnancy and childbirth alone. Had she reached out to Nathan? Had he known about the twins? "What about the anonymous note?" Jackson asked, retrieving the cryptic message from his desk. "Drawer. Forensics found nothing useful on the paper or envelope. However, I took the liberty of reviewing security footage from nearby buildings on the day it was mailed." Jenkins slid a grainy photograph across the desk. "This woman deposited something in the mailbox at the correct time." The image showed a slender woman in a hat and sunglasses, unidentifiable but certainly not Victoria. As Jackson pondered this new information, his phone rang. "The school nurse. Tyler has developed a fever during their afternoon art class." "I need to go," Jackson told Jenkins, already reaching for his keys. "Keep digging. Someone out there knows more than they're saying." At Westridge Academy, Jackson found Tyler curled in the nurse's office, flushed and miserable. "Temperature of 101.3, the nurse reported. "Nothing serious, but he should rest at home." In the car, Tyler leaned heavily against Jackson's side. "Sorry I got sick and interrupted your work." "Don't be ridiculous," Jackson replied, his arm protective around the small shoulders. "You're more important than any meeting." That evening, as Jackson sat beside Tyler's bed, monitoring his fever and ensuring he stayed hydrated, Ethan crept in to join them, unwilling to be separated from his twin, despite Mrs. Winter's suggestion that he sleep elsewhere to avoid catching the illness. "Brothers stay together," Ethan declared, climbing onto the bed beside Tyler. Jackson didn't have the heart to separate them. Instead, he found himself telling them stories about Nathan, his adventurous spirit, his passion for climbing mountains and protecting wildlife, his infectious laugh. "He sounds nice," Tyler murmured sleepily. "The best," Jackson agreed, smoothing back Tyler's damp hair. "He would have loved you both very much." The twins drifted to sleep, but Jackson remained, watching over them with a growing certainty that transcended DNA results. These boys belonged with him regardless of biological connections. His phone vibrated with a text from Victoria. "DNA results expedited. Report available Friday morning. Prepare yourself for disappointment." Jackson silenced the phone without responding. Across town, Victoria sat in the office of Dr. Lewis Bradford, a distinguished geneticist with financial problems and flexible ethics. "Everything is arranged," she assured him, sliding an envelope across his desk. "Just make sure the results show no relation. The Reed fortune stays where it belongs." Jackson stared at the DNA report in disbelief. The sterile language of genetic science swam before his eyes. The conclusion was unambiguous: probability of biological relationship between subjects, Tyler Taylor, Ethan Taylor, and Jackson Reed, less than 0.01%. "As I suspected," Victoria said, satisfaction evident in her voice as she stood in his home office. "These boys have no connection to our family." Jackson set the report down carefully. "That makes no sense. The resemblance to Nathan is coincidental," Victoria interrupted. You saw what you wanted to see because you're still grieving Nathan. And trying to fill that void, Jackson's mind raced through possibilities. The twins' 4th birthday had passed 2 weeks ago. A small celebration with dinosaur decorations and a trip to the Museum of Natural History. During those 4 months in his care, he'd witnessed countless mannerisms and expressions that echoed his brother. How could science contradict what seemed so obvious? The board meeting is this afternoon, Victoria continued. Now that this distraction has been resolved, we need to refocus on Reed Enterprises. The Miller acquisition won't wait forever. After she left, Jackson sat motionless, the report still open before him. Something felt wrong, not just emotionally but logically. He reached for his phone to call Jenkins when Mrs. Winters appeared at the door. "Sir, Miss Porter from Social Services is here for the monthly home assessment." The routine visit passed smoothly. After 4 months, Jackson's home had transformed into a genuine family environment, with child-appropriate spaces and established routines that impressed even the initially skeptical social worker. "The boys are thriving," Miss Porter observed, as they concluded the visit. "Your petition for permanent guardianship is progressing nicely." However, she hesitated. "Yes," Jackson prompted. "I understand from Tyler's teacher that you've been exploring their biological connections. I should caution that this is delicate territory with adopted children." Jackson nodded, his decision crystallizing. "Regardless of biology, I intend to provide them with a permanent home." After Miss Porter left, Jackson joined the twins in the garden, where they were constructing an elaborate fort with Mrs. Winters' help. Watching them play, laughing in the autumn sunshine, the DNA results seemed increasingly irrelevant. Family. He was learning transcended genetics. "Mr. Jackson," Ethan called, waving excitedly. "Come see our fortress." As Jackson approached, something in Ethan's movement caught his attention. A slight stumble quickly corrected. "You okay, buddy?" he asked casually. Ethan nodded. "Just dizzy for a second." "All better now." Jackson made a mental note to mention it at their next pediatrician visit, scheduled for the following week. That afternoon, Jackson attended the board meeting as promised, though his thoughts repeatedly drifted to the twins. Victoria presented the quarterly results with her usual precision, occasionally glancing at Jackson with unveiled triumph. "The Miller acquisition will position us perfectly for Asian market expansion," she concluded. "Jackson has authorized me to finalize terms immediately." "Actually," Jackson interjected, surprising everyone, including Victoria, "I'd like a week to review the projections." Victoria's smile froze. "We've been over the numbers repeatedly." "I'd like to review them again," Jackson insisted, his voice carrying the authority that had built Reed Enterprises. "1 week won't sink the deal." The meeting adjourned with tension hanging in the air as board members filed out. Victoria cornered Jackson. "What game are you playing? You've reviewed those projections 3 times." "Perhaps I'm being thorough," Jackson replied evenly. "Or perhaps you're still distracted by those children, despite scientific proof they're not family." Jackson met her gaze directly. "Science can be wrong, Victoria, or manipulated." Her expression flickered momentarily before hardening. "Don't be ridiculous. Accept reality and move on." That evening, after dinner, Jackson watched the twins build elaborate Lego structures on the living room floor. The quiet domesticity of the scene contrasted sharply with the corporate maneuvering of his afternoon. "Mr. Jackson?" Tyler asked suddenly. "Is Ethan sick?" Jackson looked up sharply. "Why do you ask?" "He keeps getting dizzy, and he threw up in the bathroom but didn't tell anyone." Jackson knelt beside Ethan, noting now the unusual pallor beneath his normally healthy complexion. "Is that true, Ethan?" Ethan nodded reluctantly. "I didn't want to be trouble." Jackson placed a hand on his forehead, feeling unnatural heat. "You're never trouble," he assured him, already reaching for his phone to call their pediatrician. Dr. Asil. Chen agreed to see them immediately despite the late hour. After examining Ethan thoroughly, she frowned. "His symptoms concern me," she admitted. "Fever, dizziness, unusual fatigue. I'd like to run some blood tests." "Whatever he needs," Jackson agreed, his protective instincts fully engaged as a nurse gently drew blood from Ethan's arm. Tyler refused to leave his twin's side, holding his hand tightly. Jackson watched them, These boys who had transformed his life in ways he was only beginning to understand, and made a silent promise. Regardless of DNA reports or corporate expectations, he would protect them with everything he had. The question that haunted him, however, was whether everything he had would be enough. The hospital corridor seemed endless as Jackson paced outside the pediatric intensive care unit. 3 days had passed since Ethan's initial symptoms, and what had begun as concerning had rapidly escalated to critical. Mr. Reed, Dr. Matsui, the pediatric hematologist, approached with a tablet in hand. Her expression was professionally composed, but Jackson had become adept at reading the subtle signs of concern in medical professionals. "How is he?" Jackson asked, stopping mid-stride. "Ethan's condition has stabilized temporarily, but I'm afraid we're dealing with something serious." She guided Jackson to a small consultation room, where Tyler sat huddled in a chair, refusing to be separated from the hospital, despite Mrs. Winter's attempts to take him home for rest. "I've reviewed Ethan's blood work extensively," Dr. Matsui continued once they were seated. "He's experiencing a severe form of aplastic anemia. His bone marrow isn't producing enough new blood cells." Jackson processed this information. With the same focus he applied to complex business problems. "What's the treatment plan?" "Typically, we'd start with immunosuppressive therapy, but Ethan's case is unusually aggressive. His best chance is a bone marrow transplant, and quickly." "Tyler's his identical twin," Jackson said immediately. "Wouldn't he be a perfect match?" Dr. Matsui shook her head. "We've already tested Tyler. Despite being twins, they're not identical, they're fraternal. His marrow isn't compatible enough for transplantation." The revelation struck Jackson with sudden clarity. Fraternal twins explained the minor differences he'd noticed between the boys, despite their striking similarity. It also explained how the DNA test could have missed a relationship to Nathan. Fraternal twins shared only about 50% of their genetic material, like any siblings. "What about me?" Jackson asked. "I want to be tested." Dr. Matsui's expression softened. "Mr. Reed, I understand your desire to help, but the likelihood of an unrelated adult being compatible is extremely low. We've already initiated a search through the National Donor Registry." "Test me anyway," Jackson insisted. "And what about family members? If his biological father could be located, that would significantly improve our chances." Dr. Matsui agreed. "Biological parents or siblings typically offer the highest probability of compatibility." Tyler, who had been silent until now, looked up. "Is Ethan going to die?" he asked bluntly, his small voice cracking with fear. Jackson moved immediately to kneel before him. "No," he said with firm conviction. "We're going to find a way to help him." After Dr. Matsui left to arrange Jackson's testing, he made 2 calls. First to Jenkins, instructing him to intensify the search for information about Nathan's relationship with Eliza Taylor. Then to Victoria, who answered with obvious irritation. "The Hong Kong investors can't reschedule again," she snapped. "Jackson, you need to be there tomorrow." "Ethan is critically ill," Jackson replied, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I need you to be tested as a potential bone marrow donor immediately." A long pause followed. "What?" she asked, stunned. "He needs a transplant to survive. I'm being tested now, but we need to try all possibilities." "Jackson, these children aren't related to us," Victoria insisted. "The DNA test was conclusive." "Was it?" Jackson challenged. "Or was it manipulated? The twins are fraternal, not identical." "That changes everything about genetic testing." Another silence, heavier than before. "I'll call you back," Victoria finally said, disconnecting abruptly. Back in Ethan's room, Jackson found him awake but weak, his normally vibrant face pale against the hospital sheets. Tyler had climbed onto the bed beside him, their hands clasped tightly. "Hey, buddy," Jackson said gently, taking a seat beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Ethan whispered. "But the nurse gave me ice cream, so that's good." Jackson smiled despite the knot in his throat. 4 months ago, these boys had been strangers. Now he couldn't imagine life without them. "Mr. Jackson?" Ethan asked, his voice fragile. "If I get better, can we still live with you?" "When you get better," Jackson corrected firmly. "Not if. And yes, always." Ethan's eyes, so like Nathan's, studied him seriously. Even though we're not related. Tyler told me about the test results. Jackson reached out to smooth Ethan's hair back from his forehead. Family isn't just about DNA, Ethan. It's about who loves you, who protects you, who stays beside you through the hard parts. He glanced at Tyler, including him in the promise. And I'm staying right here with both of you. That night, as Ethan finally drifted to sleep with Tyler still vigilant beside him, Dr. Matsui reappeared with an expression Jackson couldn't read. "Mr. Reed," she said quietly, "we need to talk about your test results." "I'm not compatible," Jackson concluded, his heart sinking. "Quite the opposite," Dr. Matsui replied, surprise evident in her voice. "You're a remarkably close match to Ethan, closer than we typically see outside immediate biological family. In fact, the compatibility is consistent with what we'd expect from a close blood relative." Jackson stared at her, the implications settling like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their places. "That's impossible unless you're related," Dr. Matsui finished, "and given the level of compatibility, quite closely related." The small conference room adjacent to the pediatric ICU had become Jackson's temporary office, command center, and occasional sleeping quarters over the past 48 hours. Coffee cups littered the table alongside medical journals and hastily scribbled notes. "The compatibility doesn't make sense unless—" Jackson's voice trailed off as he paced the room, speaking to Jenkins via speakerphone. "Unless you're related to the boy." Jenkins finished the thought. "And I may have found something that explains it. I've been digging deeper into Nathan's relationship with Eliza Taylor and discovered they were together longer than we initially thought, almost a year before his climbing accident, which means Nathan could have been the twins' father." Jackson concluded, "That's what I assume too, sir, but the timeline doesn't quite fit. Nathan died 5 years ago, approximately 7 months before the twins were born." Jackson stopped pacing. "Then how—" "There's more," Jenkins interrupted. "I found medical records showing that Nathan made several deposits at a fertility clinic before his final expedition. Apparently he was concerned about the risks of his climbing activities." The implication hit Jackson like a physical force. "Are you saying the twins were conceived after Nathan's death using his stored genetic material?" "It's a possibility. I'm investigating. But, sir, there's another angle we need to consider." Jackson sank into a chair. "Go on." "You and Nathan were identical twins," Jenkins stated, his voice steady. The statement hung in the air, a truth so fundamental to Jackson's existence that he rarely thought about it consciously anymore. After Nathan's death, Jackson had deliberately avoided mentioning their twin status, the reminder too painful. "If Nathan was the twins' biological father," Jenkins continued, "genetically speaking, you would appear to be their father as well. Identical twins share virtually identical DNA." Jackson's mind raced through the implications. The remarkable compatibility for the bone marrow transplant, the familiar expressions and mannerisms he'd recognized in the boys, even Victoria's desperate attempts to discredit any family connection. "The boys weren't just my nephews," Jackson whispered. "Genetically, they're like my sons." Before he could process this revelation further, the door opened. Dr. Matsui entered with a tablet, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Mr. Reed, we've completed the additional testing. You're an excellent match for the transplant. If you're still willing, we'd like to begin the donation process immediately." "Of course," Jackson answered without hesitation. "Whatever." "Tython needs—" "There's something else," Dr. Matsui added, glancing at her tablet. "We found some anomalies in the compatibility patterns that made us curious, so we ran a more comprehensive genetic analysis. The results suggest you're not just compatible with Ethan, you're almost certainly a first-degree relative. His uncle?" Jackson confirmed. "Or genetically equivalent to his father." Dr. Matsui's eyes widened slightly. "You knew," Jackson said softly. "I just discovered it myself," Jackson admitted. "It's complicated." After Dr. Matsui left to prepare for the transplant procedure, Jackson sat alone with the weight of this discovery. Nathan, his twin, his other half in many ways, had left behind more than memories. He had left 2 sons who, through an extraordinary chain of circumstances, had found their way to the one person whose genetic makeup could save them. The door opened again, this time revealing Victoria. Her normally impeccable appearance showed signs of strain, hair slightly disheveled, makeup less precise than usual. "I got your messages," she said, remaining in the doorway. "How is the boy?" "Ethan," Jackson corrected firmly. "His name is Ethan. And he's fighting. I'm a match for the transplant," Jackson added. Victoria's eyes flickered. "That's fortunate." "It's more than fortunate, Victoria. It's genetic." Jackson stood facing his sister directly. "The boys are Nathan's sons, which means you falsified the DNA test results." Victoria didn't immediately deny it. Instead, she closed the door and moved further into the room. "You don't understand what was at stake." "Explain it to me," Jackson challenged, his voice dangerously quiet. "When those boys showed up, I recognized the resemblance to Nathan immediately. I had the community center records pulled the very next day." Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "If they were confirmed as Nathan's sons, they would be entitled to his share of Reed Enterprises, 25% of everything we built. So you lied. You manipulated evidence. You nearly let Ethan die rather than acknowledge them as family." "I was protecting our legacy," Victoria insisted. "Nathan made his choice to climb mountains instead of joining the company. Why should his offspring benefit from what we built without him?" Jackson studied his sister, seeing her clearly, perhaps for the first time. "You know what Nathan would say if he were here?" he asked quietly. "He'd say none of it matters compared to those boys." Victoria flinched. "You sound just like him." "Good," Jackson replied, "because starting right now, things are going to change. Those boys aren't just Nathan's legacy. They're the future of this family. And after I donate my bone marrow to save Ethan's life, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who they are and what you tried to do." For a moment, Victoria's carefully constructed facade crumbled entirely. "Jackson, please," she pleaded. "I was wrong. I see that now. But don't destroy everything. You did that yourself," Jackson said, moving past her toward the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a life to save and a family to protect." The recovery ward of New York Presbyterian's pediatric wing had become a makeshift family command center. 3 weeks. After the bone marrow transplant, Jackson sat beside Ethan's bed, reviewing business documents while the boy slept peacefully across the room. Tyler was engaged in an intense chess match with Jenkins, who had become an unexpected ally and frequent visitor. "Check," Tyler announced triumphantly, moving his knight into position. Jenkins studied the board with exaggerated concentration. "Impressive strategy, young man. Your uncle's been teaching you well." The word uncle still carried a particular weight in the room following the transplant and subsequent DNA confirmation. Jackson had officially shared the truth with the twins, explaining in age-appropriate terms that their biological father had been his identical twin brother, making Jackson genetically equivalent to their father, though technically their uncle. "Mr. Jackson." Ethan's voice, still weak but growing stronger each day, drew Jackson's immediate attention. "Can I have some water?" Jackson helped him sip through a straw, noting with relief the improving color in his cheeks. Dr. Matsui had been cautiously optimistic about his prognosis, explaining that the transplanted stem cells were gradually rebuilding Ethan's bone marrow function. "How are you feeling, buddy?" Jackson gently smoothed the boy's hair back from his forehead, a gesture that had become second nature. "Better today?" he asked. "Yeah," Ethan replied softly. "Can we go home soon?" Home. The word resonated deeply with Jackson. The mansion that had once felt cold and empty to him had now transformed into a real home, thanks to the presence of these 2 boys. Dr. Matsui walked in, smiling as she approached. "Good news, Ethan," she said, after examining him. "Your latest. Blood work shows significant improvement. The donor cells are integrating beautifully. That means your uncle's supercells are making you stronger," Tyler said confidently, having taken it upon himself to learn everything about Ethan's condition after doing some research with Mrs. Winters. Dr. Matsui nodded approvingly at Tyler's explanation. "Exactly right. And if this trend continues, we can talk about discharging him early next week." Once the medical team had left, Jackson's phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. "Board meeting concluded. Everything proceeded as discussed. Papers are ready for your signature." The weeks Following the revelation had been turbulent for Reed Enterprises. Victoria had initially threatened legal action to maintain her position, but when presented with irrefutable evidence of her deception, she had reluctantly stepped down from her role, although she kept a limited number of shares in the company. Jenkins cleared his throat across the room. "Sir, the legal team has completed the documentation for the boy's official status." Jackson nodded and accepted the folder Jenkins handed him. Inside were the finalized adoption papers, now reflecting the twins' biological connection to Nathan, while officially naming Jackson as their legal father. The process had been expedited due to Jackson's resources, but he had insisted on full transparency regarding the boy's origins. "What's that?" Tyler asked, abandoning his chess game to see what was inside. "These are very important papers," Jackson explained, inviting him closer. "They make it official that you and Ethan will live with me permanently. I'll be your legal father, though we all know that biologically, I'm your uncle." Tyler considered this new information seriously. "But you'll be like our dad in the ways that matter." "Exactly," Jackson confirmed, reflecting on the wisdom he had gained from these children. "Family goes beyond genetics and legal definitions." "Does that mean we'll be Reed instead of Taylor?" Tyler asked. "You can be whatever you want," Jackson replied. "Or you could be Taylor Reed to keep your mom's name too." Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "I think Mom would like that, and I think our birth dad, your brother, would too." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Winters entered with a carefully wrapped package. "This arrived for the boys," she explained, placing it on Ethan's bedside table. Inside was a framed photograph of Nathan at the summit of a snow-covered mountain, smiling triumphantly. A note accompanied it. "He would be proud of all of you. The past can't be changed, but the future is still unwritten." Though unsigned, Jackson suspected the note came from Roberts, Nathan's former climbing partner who had been unreachable during their initial investigation. As evening settled over the hospital, Jackson found himself watching the twins, Ethan drowsing after his medication, and Tyler curled protectively in the chair beside him. The journey that had brought them together no longer seemed like a coincidence, but like an invisible thread, connecting Nathan's sons to the one person genetically capable of saving them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, finalizing Victoria's departure from leadership, restructuring the company to secure the twins' future, and continuing Ethan's recovery. But tonight, in the quiet of this hospital room, Jackson Reed, businessman, brother, and now father, felt a sense of purpose no corporate success had ever provided. Family, he was learning, was both inherited and chosen, biological and emotional. And sometimes, through extraordinary circumstances, it was exactly where you were meant to be all along. The autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Reed mansion, casting light on the transformed living room, where photographs now adorned walls that had once only displayed expensive artwork. 3 years had passed since Ethan's life-threatening illness and the extraordinary revelations that followed. Today marked a special occasion, the official opening of the Nathan Reed Foundation for Children's Health, established with a $100 million endowment to research rare blood disorders and support families navigating pediatric medical crises. "Dad, where's my blue tie?" Tyler called from upstairs. Now a confident 7-year-old, he had exchanged his earlier weariness for the comfortable certainty of belonging. "Check your dresser, top drawer," Jackson replied, adjusting his own tie in the hallway mirror. The title Dad had replaced Mr. Jackson gradually over the past years. Each usage strengthened the bond between them. Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs, already impeccably dressed in a child-sized suit that matched Jackson's. His recovery had been complete, though regular checkups remained part of their routine. The bone marrow transplant that had saved his life had become the catalyst for the foundation they would launch today. "Do I look like a proper businessman?" Ethan asked, striking a serious pose that made Jackson smile. "The most proper," Jackson assured him. "Your father would be very proud." They spoke of Nathan often, Jackson reflected. Uncle Nathan to the boys, though biologically their father. He had made sure they knew their complicated origins, explaining that families sometimes form in unexpected ways. Photos of Nathan now held places of honor throughout the house, alongside pictures of Eliza, that Jenkins had painstakingly tracked down from her university days and environmental work. Mrs. Winters appeared from the kitchen where caterers were, preparing for the reception that would follow the foundation's ribbon-cutting ceremony. "The car will be here in 15 minutes, she reminded them, "and Mr. Jenkins has already arrived." Jenkins, who had transitioned from Reed Enterprises' security director to Jackson's right hand in family matters, had become an unexpected constant in their lives. He taught the boys chess, joined them for weekend hikes, and had become something between an uncle and a grandfather figure. The doorbell rang, and Tyler raced to answer it, revealing Victoria standing uncertainly on the threshold. Her relationship with Jackson and the boys remained complicated. Quarterly visits and holiday appearances represented the tentative rebuilding of family connections after her deception had nearly cost Ethan his life. "You came?" Jackson acknowledged, neither warm nor cold. "I said I would," Victoria replied, offering a small gift bag to each twin. "For your special day." Inside were custom-made cufflinks, miniature climbing carabiners crafted in gold, a tribute to Nathan's passion. The gesture, though small, represented Victoria's ongoing attempts at redemption, her gradual acceptance that these boys, the sons of the brothers she had loved in her own complicated way, belonged in the Reed family. The foundation ceremony unfolded beautifully on the hospital grounds where Ethan had once fought for his life. Prominent physicians, business leaders, and families who had already benefited from the foundation's preliminary work gathered to witness Jackson and the twins officially cut the ribbon on the new research wing. 3 years ago, a medical crisis brought our family to its knees, Jackson began his address, the twins standing proudly beside him. It also revealed the extraordinary connection that had brought us together in the first place. Today we honor both the science that saved Ethan's life and the invisible threads of family that sometimes work in mysterious ways. As applause filled the air, Tyler slipped his hand into Jackson's. "Dad," he whispered, "I think Uncle Nathan is watching." Jackson squeezed his hand gently. "I think so too." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, Jackson stood in his home office, once a sanctuary of solitude, now frequently invaded by homework questions and impromptu sword fights with cardboard tubes. His gaze fell on a photograph of himself and Nathan as children, arms thrown around each other's shoulders, identical grins reflecting their shared DNA and childhood adventures. "I'm taking care of them, Nate," he whispered to the image. "Your boys, our boys." The sound of laughter echoed from the garden, where the twins were showing Jenkins their latest tree-climbing technique. Jackson moved to the window to watch them, these remarkable children who had transformed his life from successful but empty to gloriously, messily complete. The path that had led them to each other defied logical explanation. A broken-down car, in a rainstorm, an impulsive decision, a life-threatening illness, and the extraordinary genetic coincidence that had allowed him to save Ethan's life. Some might call it chance, others destiny. Jackson Reed, once defined solely by his business acumen, now understood it simply as family, the most valuable legacy his brother could have left him, and one he would protect with everything he had. The twins raced toward the house, their faces alight with joy and mischief. Jackson opened the door to welcome them home,